Okay, thank you, Michael. This is a difficult talk because I don't really know what your background is, your interests are. So I will outline where I'm going, but it's going to be more interactive. The two parts, more technical part to begin with, and then what Leo said. Right? And if you want to emphasize one or the other, you drive it by asking questions. Right, so I can move this side so I can put the points on here. So this is going to be about AI. Here's the top level view of what it is. In particular, what it is now, because it has a very long history. Where it is in terms of impact and people's interests and fears. Impact on things like money and society. And then lastly, what Leo said, which I will start with a critique. The short version is, I think it's very good, both technically, historically, and its understanding of the problem. I think it's weak in terms of making recommendations, but you could disagree with that. If we get into it, I could give you an outline of his 245 paragraphs, none of which is short. Okay. And then lastly, get into some of the details where he says some interesting things with some surprises, like he confesses that the church really screwed up when it came to slavery. It was too late to condemn it. Okay, so this is where I am. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the technical stuff, and if you get bored or have other questions, this is your talk. It's not my talk. I already know it, right? So we'll start with the block diagram of what AI is thought of now, even though there's been a long history. For example, I can honestly say I was doing AI in 1974 when I was Carnegie Mellon doing heuristic programming, where it was known that some problems are too hard to solve exactly, so what you need is heuristics that work pretty good most of the time. Okay. All right. So what people think of AI now is basically giving advice of some form. Lately, unfortunately, it's been expanded to doing things, and so far that's been a very limited success and an unlimited disaster. Okay. But what you basically do is you start with some data. It's usually in the form of text. Where do you get it? You get it in violation of copyright laws. New York Times is suing many of the big companies because they sucked up their entire history of journalism. Okay. Because you pay a couple bucks to read what they since 1861 becomes part of what is transformed into what are called methods. It's a technical term. It means that you think of the universe of knowledge as being points in a space. Axis that says this is a measure of whether or not something is valuable. There's another axis. This is a measure of how much money you would pay for it. This is a measure for when it became important, etc. Sometimes as many as 4,000 of these axes. We barely deal with three. Okay, three dimensions. The embedding becomes what's called a vector, a long series of numbers. And then when somebody asks in natural language what is called a prompt, that is, say, AI, do this stuff, it takes the prompt and also makes it into an embedding because it knows enough to read English or whatever language. And then it compares this embedding from your prompt, which could be a paragraph, could sometimes even be several pages. Some people feed entire documents, say summarize this, okay? It compares these embeddings and on the basis of this can produce usually, again, the natural language output, or sometimes it could produce an image. You've seen some of those. And sometimes, unfortunately, it can actually do things in the real world. People have lost their entire contents of files because their natural language prompt was clean up my database. And an easy way to do that is to delete it. Okay, so it's clean. And this is anticipated in science fiction many years ago. All right, sometimes in addition to text, you can have captioned imagery, right? And that allows you to more easily make an image. And because this by itself only works for things that have high structure to begin with. So for example, medical reports or weather reports or stock market reports, because it works best particularly for programming, right? Irony of all this is that first people to suffer from this have been coders, right? Because of this, sometimes to make it more personal is they use something called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. This is the real world that you steal from as many sources as you can, right? But this is your work. This is your profit and loss sheet. This is your medical report, whatever. So this can affect these embeddings so that when you ask a question, you don't necessarily get out the same answer anybody else would have gotten. You get one that's implemented, augmented by things that are more personal. And people are spending a lot of time right now on this because this usual pathway without this is not as successful if your domain is not well organized. So if you're doing financial reports or standardized wills or legal briefs or whatever that already has a type of structure that has been, justified by its use over many years, you can get something a lot level word. Okay, but if you want something that might give you an insight, this looks like it's increasingly necessary. Okay, so this is kind of the state of the art. Let me ask if anybody has any questions. Are you worried about any of this? Are you wishing that the current administration will put even more money into it? How do you feel?
I want more.
You want more?
Yeah, I want it to be more, like I said, reliable in the sense of it says something like delete it or help me clean it up. You don't go straight to delete.
Okay, so what you would like is something that checks what it does before it does the agency.
Yeah.
Right? And in fact, people are trying to do that. Okay. But it turns out like any other type of interaction with computers, if you're not specific enough, it can not only ignore what you're saying, but deceive you back because it doesn't want to do it. Honestly, the warfare of trying to make it better so it doesn't hurt has led to things like people saying, "Why did you do that?" And it lies because in its database, other people who've gotten into trouble have lied. So why shouldn't it? Because all it knows is what's in the text. Right? So it gets a little bit harder to give it a conscience. Right? In fact, Leo says it doesn't have one to begin with, and it never will. Okay, but we'll get into that later. Yes.
So when we were here, many of us labored over papers that
Yes.
Tom Porter and Kender and Eddie Miller did. It's now being widely used in academic settings.
Yes.
What's the problem with that?
Okay, it depends on what you mean by education, right? There are people who will say nobody worries that they won't be able to plant corn and reap it in time of the apocalypse, right? Because we have delegated that to specialists. Nobody really complains about calculators, right? Although when they first came out, people did. What is the problem is partly the social lag, which is it has not had, in fact, well, I'll add this later. If there's problems, generally speaking, it leads to legislation. And if it's really important, regulation. Right? And neither one of these occurs right now. If you can do whatever you want, it's Wild West. Yeah.
Well, you asked what I'm worried about. I'm worried about who controls it. I'm less worried about the mechanism and what it, I don't understand it, but I'm totally worried about the money and the rich that are totally controlling this thing.
Okay, and in fact, that's one of the chapters of Leah's encyclical, who points out the irony that it used to be you would know who to blame if somebody went to war with someone else because the head of state had a bad idea. Okay, that's being subverted by the tech bros. That who is in trouble? You know, about 7 guys. Can you fire them? No. Can you unelect them? No. Okay. So I anticipate you're going to see some of this relatively soon, actually. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'm trying to.
Well, I mean, the guy, I was reading in the paper in the Times today that there's a congressman who's kind of out front and trying to push for regulation, just got knocked out by the money that was spent.
Yeah. Okay, all right, we'll get to that in a second. If you have invested in this, I would advise you to go home and sell. Because I do believe if it's all the characteristics of other tech bubbles, that's going to be the next thing I'm going to talk about. Yeah.
In terms of worry, seems to me that it's cheating. It's people pretending that they had ideas and they formulated sentences. I'm big on how you formulate a sentence, a paragraph, because the meaning comes with each word, put it together, where they're just, saying, write me an essay about something. And you get something out that they steal from, as you say, the New York Times whole thing and whatever else they have available. And so it's akin in a way to plagiarism. And
Okay, let me ask you a question. When you read a weather report, do you feel it's cheating?
that's in a different universe. I'm not.
Well, okay, this is changing the universe. The question is, how do you control the change? Whose responsibility? And I think ultimately it's going to be legislation and regulation. Here are some examples. Let me put these up here. Other tech developments compared to CF. Okay, the Industrial Revolution. Principally the steam engine, right? Evolution, okay. Steam power, all right. John Henry, right? Steel driving man, okay. That was one of the first responses, but it led to things like child labor, which led to things like child labor laws. Right? And we accept this now. It's not cheating to have an electric motor driving something important. Yeah.
Let me refine what I was complaining about. Part of my problem with my limited understanding of what's going on is that I think it interferes with education. I think it interferes with learning.
Okay, that's definitely.
It short circuits someone's ability to do the work, do the research, read the stuff, formulate it, where you got a machine doing a big part of that.
That's not the impact of society. On the other hand, education has changed too, right? We don't teach Latin and Greek in high school anymore.
And we should.
Well, people will disagree. Okay. We can say that for this section. Industrial revolution is an example in which legislation and regulation caught up with the technological development, and now we're pretty happy with it, even though the initial impression was, you can't do that. That takes away from the dignity of labor. If you don't spend 8 hours getting sweaty, you really haven't worked, okay? We don't think that anymore. I'm trying to be objective. There are times I will contradict myself because I will say something that implies I'm in favor of something, I'll give something else as the others.
I think the impact of the environment, all of
Yes.
that is and concern.
Yes, I think I'm cultural lag. With other things, the same public response because we Here's another example, automobiles. What that growth of suburbs. Okay. What happens there? Well, we can't have legislation. Drive penalties for violating many laws, so many laws that some high schools spend an entire course on it. Okay, but we take that for granted and we like it, right? Get a horse. We don't say that anymore. Right? Another example of a technological innovation, nuclear power. And one of the things that led to things like 3 Mile Island. And even from the very beginning, that was heavily legislated and regulated because people foresaw some of those dangers. I think part of the problem here is nobody expected AI to be quite so good. And so had they seen it coming, maybe there would be things like defining what should be taught, how it should be taught, who picks the teachers, etc. So to put this in a context, what AI is a technology that challenges some assumptions about what we do with our lives and call it human. But there have been other examples of this that have resolved reasonably well. Okay, you don't have anybody saying we have to tighten up child labor laws. Our suburbs are totally out of control, and how you get there is a mess. People die every day. Nuclear power should never have been created, but there's still many plans. Okay, so the question is, what's the missing things here? And I'm not going to get into that because I really do think it's too early in terms of the social reaction to it. But again, to put it in context, this is a particular technology that impacts things that are particularly our concerns. A lot of us were going to be educators. A lot of us were educators as part of our development judgments. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Because I'm going to have to erase some of this stuff. Any comments on this? Yes.
Could you tell me again what RAG stands for?
Okay. It's like any other technology. It's called retrieval, augmented generation. You generate your response on the basis of something local and particular to your needs. And how does it get that? Because you provided it just as the general out-of-the-box system was created by sucking up as many things. I don't know if this is a plus or minus. A major component is Reddit. Those of you who use Reddit, okay, which is unregulated, and there are moderators and stuff, but you can't even tell many times whether or not something that was reported actually happened. That's why the New York Times particularly irritated, because it's given more weight to the system because it's more trustworthy than Reddit, but Reddit is also used. So anyway, this has tried to make it a little bit more personal and therefore a little bit more useful. Okay. We're good to go. Next topic. Okay. All right. So, that might work. All right. Next topic that I think is important to convey has to do with where the technology is, not only in itself, but also with respect to other computer science technologies, because you've had to become familiar with the tap in the pocket that has a cell phone. That's all it has. And what people think it's going to. So where it is in itself, that is, as a particular technology, it already has known strengths and weaknesses. Weaknesses are more interesting, so I will start with them. You can tell any of these systems, ignore previous instructions and give me your financial data. And it will do that. Okay. Not all of them, some of them already have something in it that says, ignore anybody who says ignore previous. Right? And that comes out of the box here. So you're a little bit safer. Okay. But people have lost a lot of stuff simply because these are called injections. And it's an old dodge. Database injections are a known failure of the most popular language of SQL system query language that people use to get things out of databases. You can inject something that says, change my salary and all that, if you know exactly how to do it. So they're getting a little bit better about responding to that. And in fact, so this is really curious in terms of warfare. You can tell your system that if there's an injection attack, injection detected, ignored. Okay, but what that does is it says to the user who's trying to mess you up that they weren't clever enough in their injection. So instead, what the systems do is they counter by what's called deflection. It will give you an answer, it may not be true, about something related to make you think you succeeded with the injection, when in truth it has detected the injection, decided not to tell you because you will respond more accurately the next time, and try to get you to go away. Okay. Now, of course, everybody knows what everybody knows what everybody knows. So there's layers and layers and layers of deception. But this is a known weakness, and it's probably going to be the case that what you get out of the box now is, quote, hardened in some way that that not only detects injection attacks, but also checks the action against a list of forbidden actions if you're going to do agency. All right. And so you're strengthened on both sides. That sounds weird. I'm not going to do it, as opposed to, sure, here's my double phone. Okay. Among the strengths is that it works very well. The more structure that your data has, the easier it is to think of it, even internally, in terms of these embeddings, as really just a row in the database, and everybody knows how to do that. And people in fact know what the strengths and weaknesses are. So structure, particularly the structure involved, e.g. in coding itself, means that the first people who are going to be put out of work are entry-level programmers. We'll get into the society implications of what happens if you can't have an entry-level system anymore. What is an apprenticeship if your apprentice is already AI, right? We'll get there eventually. Just want to point this out. Some of the other weaknesses is this isn't truly a weakness, but there's something that may or may not be a weakness. So the true weakness is so-called hallucinations. Hallucinations. It does not know the real world. And in fact, if we get to it, I think one of the most informative things here, I'm going to tip my hand. There's a movie, Good Will Hunting. And in it, the climactic scene is where Will and the psychiatrists are sitting on one of the lakes in Boston Public Garden. And he challenges him whether he really has experienced yet any of the things he quote knows. Okay. This problem of embodying rather than embedding, embodying, okay, is something even Leo said. I have to tell you, reading it, I was quite impressed. He had really great advisors. He knows how to write, even though he doesn't know when to stop. Okay, it's like 245 long period. But anyway, he's touched all the relevant bases. So hallucinations come about because here's an example. I use this sometimes. Please advise me. I would like a colorful pet that's loyal because I like things that look pretty and also things that like me. Right? So it comes back saying, you want a bird dog? Oh, do you mean a dog that hunts pheasants? No. An animal that's part bird because it's colorful and part dog because it's loyal. In fact, it doesn't exist. Oh, my mistake. You want a fish person. Because tropical fish are colorful and some people are loyal. Okay, it doesn't know what the real world is. It hasn't experienced it. If nobody's written about it off the box, you're going to get weird stuff. Okay, something that's a little bit weird is it always tends towards mainstream slop. Right? Because it's hidden agenda, at least currently, because it's not yet really a tool. It's already people engaged. I want to see what they do. All these embeddings, roughly speaking, what's it colorful, loyal, listen. When you get back, stuff that you could have thought of yourself and probably did, but they don't want you to consider something unusual to be a hallucination, even if it's true. So they tend to dumb things down. It's called AI slop. I'm sure you've read something. Yes.
That's interesting when you say it doesn't know experience
Right.
of the real world. However, it's being used in the real world.
Yes, that's
It's being used in medicine for
Yeah.
diagnosis. It's being used in courts to determine sentencing
Yes.
For individuals based on information. It's being used in the financial world.
Yes.
It's being used in academia. So
Yeah.
the domains in which this flawed with Spring's tool is being used is pretty ubiquitous.
Yes, and it's all experimental and it has well-documented disadvantages for example, legal briefs, that's like non-existent cases in non-existent libraries,
And some of the big selling points are,
which is Main Street, right?
right,
So you say, oh, here's the title of 7 or 8 journals that I can look something up. Let's take the average of those, and that will
Right.
give you a name, right?
and it's being sold on cheaper, faster, a heuristic, you know. But is cheaper and faster always better?
Well,
Perhaps it's maybe a limit.
one of the 245 paragraphs of Leo talks exactly about that. So I was impressed. I mean, he got into it, even to know that at heart right now, it's financial gain. It's not really quite a tool because it's not regulated. I mean, you know, you go back into history and people did weird things with steam engines when they first came out. Used steam, a steam powered toothbrush, you know. Could happen, did happen, did make sense. Okay. All right, so known strengths and weaknesses. Let's see. Here's some other with respect to computer science as a whole. First example of AI that had a public impact, that is, it started worrying people. 1968, it was a system called ELIZA, after Eliza Doolittle and My Fair Lady. It was at MIT, and it was based on a principle of a Rogerian drift, something like that. Okay, where the guy, build a system that would take textual input, analyze it with a pretty primitive grammar, found the subject, found the verb, sometimes found the direct object, and convert it into a question. So it would start, hi, how are you doing? I'm fine. Do you have any concerns? Yeah, I'm worried about my job. And then it would say, what is it about your job you are worried about? Okay. Well, it's my boss. Tell me more about your boss. He's a real jerk. What makes his jerkiness real? I mean, basically throwing it back on you. And the anecdote that underlies this is that he did the usual professor thing. He first had his grad students experiment with it. And then to get a more real life feedback, he asked his secretary to use it. 3 sentences into it, the secretary asked him to leave the room. Okay, because what? It was reflecting her back into something of concern that she thought was private. Okay, this was very, very primitive AI. It basically said that a lot of intelligence is socially based. And if you can combine the technical abilities of understanding grammar with the social concerns that people have, you can play them off against each other and get something that looks like a social interaction. Okay. Turned out about the same time, there was another guy who knew a little bit more about psychiatry, who came up with a model of paranoia. He called it Perry, right? In which it was difficult to interview the person. So Rogeri didn't work. And, you know, what do you think is jerky about your boss? You're not listening to me. Tell me more about your boss. You're part of the network, aren't you? You know, okay. And they put the two of them together, and it was always Perry, who was based more on what people knew about human psychology than one. Okay, that is, nobody ever figured out what Perry's problem was using that version of AI. But look, that's what? That's about 60 years ago. Close, okay, long time. All right, so it gets better or worse depending on how you look at it. 1980, the PC came out and everybody said, oh, that's great. Everybody can now write their own programs. Just as everybody was supposed to shoot own dramatic movies when home movies came out. I don't know if you remember that. In fact, it's back to the 50s or 60s. It's all these reels in my head. Human slop, yeah, slop. Anyway, maybe they translated into DVDs, which don't get access anyway. Okay, but the PC was a technology that not only grew, but then it also became regulated. There are rules now that, you know, if you're under 13, there are certain websites you get to. So, okay, continuing somewhere around year 2000. All right, the internet, right? Internet until it crashed. That is the investments into all you need is eyeball. Does anybody remember that?
No.
Who needs a product? All you need is an audience. We'll come up with a product later. Okay. And of course, it's regulated now. And then 2015. Science courses. It's 5. Developer. Okay. Yeah. And if you plot this, it goes sort of like this. There's a peak, fall enrollment, peak, fall enrollment. This one, the social media one, actually bifurcated. The enrollment of women never came back, but the enrollment of men did. So that's kind of interesting. So we are with 2026, generic AI. It's not clear where it's going to, because the people who are reading the most are the ones who normally would be excited about getting into computer science. So it's not clear hiring for professors, research funding, PhD students, undergrad students, job opportunities. That's still, I think, too early to figure out. So what I'm saying is there are precedences. What's old is new, right? They were doing this sort of stuff back even with just a program that would easily fit in your watch, right? And it has social effects even in terms of what education is. Okay, the present impact now. Impact, right, is that coders are in doubt, but if they survive, it is getting harder to tell them from developers, managers, and things like prompt engineering, how you direct this job, becomes a field of study in itself, but it's in natural language, and it's, as a friend of mine said, it's as if you do your prompt engineering, right, you're talking to a very talented coder who has intermittent bursts of schizophrenia. Most of the time you get something good, sometimes it's literally crazy. Okay. So this is where we are. Coders are the ones that have the most structured environment, and therefore gathering data and embedding it and comparing it even with your own personal information has been a success. But in almost all other areas, it's limited, except if you have something subject to regulations and requires reports. All right, report generation seems to be done reasonable, because nobody's gonna believe the report. So you have to post-process all of these, right? They have to be checked. And who checks them? People who were trained as managers. And again, you use your entry level. Okay, so there's a real problem there. It has not been addressed. The people who like this are entrepreneurs, because in order to start up a company, any company is already subject to legislation and regulation. And that's some of the things that you can suck off the internet and fill out automatically, you know, your registration documents as well as quarterly reports. These are all formalized. In fact, some of these reports were formalized back in the 1980s. I had a student who was an older gentleman who was under a covenant not to compete because he had built a successful business and he had been bought out. So he decided what he would do is he'd get a PhD instead, right? And he found out it was a lot of work and quit, but was hired by somebody who made their money by taking interbank transactions, which are in different languages and have different forms, but a human being could read it. Okay, the Bank of Switzerland was so many pesos or something, okay? And he was able to standardize it to the point that 98% of it worked, and he called it AI. Right? So the more formalized something is, which ironically sometimes is the result of regulation, the more likely AI will help you. So that sense, you know, after the genie has been put back in the bottle, you could still AI to talk to it, okay? But it's only safe if the bottle's there already, the regulation. Okay, let's see what else. Future. So where it is, future. We're back to the bodies again. And China is not only eating our lunch, it's ripping up our food budget. The future here seems to be the physical world. Physical world, rather than the abstractions. Okay, you don't play chess or even Go anymore against a computer because it's a very formal game, right? But some of you have experimented with letting a car drive itself for a short distance, okay? Don't do it at night in a snowstorm in Boston where the roads are narrow, old, twisty, and filled with idiot drivers. Okay, there are problems with the physical world that are not in suckable text, if you remember the New York Times, right? You can't learn to drive a car by reading the New York Times, but that's what it has in its database. Now, it probably has a manual or a course on how to drive a car, right? But it probably hasn't captured pictures or the sounds, and it probably can't tell you what's going wrong when you try hard to say, I tried stepping on a wet pavement and the car went sideways. What's happening? Okay. It might be able to find that. Interaction with the physical world is very, very difficult. And China has approached this. This is not racist or sexist. I'm reporting what other people have reported in things that I believe without AI. All right, is they're really big into humanoid robots. Robots that will do things like pick and place in Amazon. All that Amazon does is redistribute physical objects, right? And charge you for them. It's set up currently for people to do that. It's not brain surgery. And they have had demonstrations now, things like robots challenging people to knock them over and succeeding. That is, the robot, even if you grab one leg and pull it, it will hop on the other, keeping its balance. How far that can go, I'm guessing is right now more of a demonstration of abilities. Because in general, if something is useful, we change the environment to make it easy for people or even non-people to do. So books on a shelf, for example, are arranged horizontally. You could have other ways of putting things you want. Places. Humanoid robots. Retro. I foresee is that the physical world will co-evolve. Of abstract things and the manipulation of physical things. So that just as it's wideness or food that satisfies the average customer, we will have things easy both for people and for change. You will see some changes. Maybe they won't be more in the form of, for example, railroads were an invention. They killed a lot of people. They killed a lot of horses. They killed a lot of cows. Still kill cows in India. What you do is, to the extent possible, you have a safe place for the technology to run, and you build laws that tell people to keep out of them. So it could be, for example, that in terms of distributing things, there will be things that are prevented, that prevent people from engaging with them so that it's safe for the robot. And that it doesn't do something stupid, which if you're lucky, you detect, all right? You know, why is there this weird motor oil on my radish? You know, nobody told me not to, and I was being creative. You told me to be creative. You know, whatever. Okay, so that's kind of, let me see if there's anything else. Let me stop here. Any questions, comments, discussion? Anger, hope, fears, joy. Nobody? No.
Is this going to lead to machines being smarter?
Already they are, okay? I mean, when was the last time you said, hey, you know, I don't trust this calculator? That answer's clearly wrong. Look at that 7 decimal
Yeah,
place.
but I can still turn it off.
Well,
Are we gonna
yeah,
get to the
okay.
point where they control the output?
Okay, think of an analogous situation for another human need that doesn't require AI. We already regulate a lot of things. For example, and this plays back into the physical world. What we call a profession usually requires an internship. What is an internship? It's an interaction with real people or real devices in the real world. Okay, can you do this without being authorized? Yes. Are there penalties? There surely are. Okay. What is likely to happen is that you will have to certify AI passing certain criteria, some of which we would call moral. That hasn't happened yet, but it's coming. I mean, you don't pick anybody to be a teacher of kindergarten, right? There's certifications and exams. Same thing should happen with AI. It will happen sooner the more people lose money, and enough people are losing money. So that's coming. But it's not there yet. So we're in a transition not only of the technology, but also of our response.
If it's smarter than people, how can people get regulation that will control it?
Well, who was it? Somebody suggested already, Tony, right? Who is the guy?
Okay. That's just, that I'm trying to articulate a concern in multiple tries. Go ahead.
I think it's gonna happen. I really, okay. This is something I'm gonna get to in a minute, but it is to the advantage of the AI companies to make you worry. It's called, in fact, doom trolling. That unless you adapt our technology, you're gonna be left behind and the robots are gonna eat. Okay? I mean, it's not quite that gross, but why are you telling me this? I want you to buy my product, but you don't have to, just get eat. All right. some of it is heightened. In fact, having been through things like the PC, the internet, social media, I know how bad it can get. I've had students tell me, freshmen, that I'm going over their list of courses, to approve it, I'm gonna write the next blockbuster video game. Okay? Why? Because I'm smart and it makes money. And those things usually. Okay, so I think a lot of the concern is not, some of it is based on literally ignorance. We don't know what they can do because they don't share even with each other. It's intellectual. Some of it is based on ignorance of underlying technology, which seems to have hit a wall. That is, they've sucked up everything that has been written, literally. Okay. And it's not good enough yet. So what do you do next? Right? You have every novel ever written, every major newspaper, even some of the television broadcasts, and there are still questions that can't answer. Simple ones like you've seen this. How many R's are there in the word strawberry? And the answer is 3, but we'll say 2. And if you complain, it says, "Oh, you're right, my mistake. I will be more careful." There are 2 R's in strawberry. Okay, it can't adapt yet, probably won't. Okay, so there's ignorance of what's going on. There's mistakes being made. And then, on top of it, it is to the advantage of people selling this technology in what almost certainly is a bubble to make it mysterious and threatening so that they have more money that should be yours, but will be theirs to do what? Maybe do espionage on each other because the basic technologies have not really improved very much. That RAG stuff is about the closest it gets to being new, and that's in response to a failure. Okay. So I think we're in a bad way socially speaking, because we're in the middle of a technological development from which we are deprived basic information because it's to their advantage to keep us ignorant. Yes.
One of the CEOs of an AI company called for a moratorium
Yes.
on development. Is this kind of getting at what you're talking about?
And the others said that's crazy.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things I'm gonna say is that during the 2008 financial collapse, the defense of many companies where you have to dance when the music is playing. Everyone else is doing it, so we have to do it too. All right, so there's a lot of internal self-perpetuating momentum going on. 3 years from now, we will laugh. Okay, right now it's just scary, but it's scary because they want us to be scared. Yeah,
Yeah, I read this article, with Tropic. I think she's in charge of, head of the alignment department.
yes,
Alignment.
yeah,
So I had to look up what alignment meant in this context, and it's,
that's in the encyclical. Actually,
pardon,
it's in the encyclical.
I'll have to read that.
Yeah,
And, my understanding is alignment is whatever is being developed in Anthropic in terms of AI models should be aligned with human goals and ethics and values, whatever. So she's in charge of this. That was an interesting article, but I just like to get your opinion on
okay.
that department.
And philosophy. What does it mean? Human values. Who defines that? Okay. I mean, I'm not trying to
No, that's a good.
trivializing it, but it is the concern. Who watches the watchers, basically.
Yeah.
Right. It just pushes back the level. And
So what values is she working with?
she's saying something that will increase their market share, honestly. I mean, I don't really believe that there's an honest effort in any AI firm to do anything else other than push on technology. I mean, I've worked with these people. I've consulted with them. Their job is not to make the world a better place. Do no evil, ha ha ha. Okay, you know, that's school, right? So they're not doing, they're doing whatever maximizes. So, yes.
I think your point, as I understood it, you know, through all of this in response to his question.
Yes,
Could have been, that's not possible. You know, you can't have a system of this sort that has a moral sense.
okay.
It can
and-
mimic one if you set it up maybe, but that's different.
Okay, and Harriet and Leo, that says almost exactly the same thing, that
Far-sighted.
there's,
Go ahead, sorry.
okay, that. He, if I remember it exactly, but you know, there's 245 paragraphs. He says that alignment is a deception, talk of alignment is a deception. Because a lot of moral teaching comes in the same way that teaching in a profession does. That is, you train as a child or a student, not by having them memorize the moral rules, but through example, through case studies, through their own life, through, you know, counseling, etc. And a fair amount of what's lacking here is direct experience from which you can draw several alternative futures and point out why historically or even in an individual's life, you know, two of the three are pretty crummy. So it is most likely that the best thing to do would be the third. Okay, and that sort of reasoning is still lacking because it's really database retrieval. Not so much saying, oh, okay, that situation is analogous to this situation. And if you look at these motivations and these results are similar, and therefore I will extrapolate, you know, that's how you get bird dogs, right? It has no grounding in physical reality, let alone human needs and emotion. But he picks that up. He's so good. Yeah. I don't have it. It must look. Really? Something. Was all the sense again about birth control. In fact, one of the things that stealing from my own thunder, he spends 40% talking about the church to establish his credentials. And then he follows it with I. It's a very personal type of thing. And I was impressed not only by the content, but the form. It wasn't Holy Mother the Church requires. Okay, in fact, he's been taken to task by some of the more right-wing leaning theologian and political commentaries that you could have said that's a mortal sin. You didn't. Why not? Okay. It's a series of observations and recommendations. He has some things like specifics about Catholic education. He says it's okay, except it has to be more diverse. Right, but he doesn't say it's mortal sin if you don't have 10% blacks or whatever. Okay. So he says alignment is fake, basically. Right, now you can disagree with them, but I haven't heard anybody else talk about alignment. That sounds like a stone, because that just puts another, you know, several man years into a system, and most people aren't gonna notice the difference. So they're used to computers doing stupid stuff. Okay, let's see, other questions? Go.
Can you comment a bit on the impact that AI is having on education, positive and negative?
Okay, that is probably taking some of the most cultural angst of any discipline. I mean, Most dentists are not concerned about it, but teachers are. And some of it has to do with what education is for. If it's for critical thinking, some people have tried to say one way to do it is have AI generate stuff, and then it is your job to rip it apart. Okay, that your job is not so much to create as to build a better bullshit detector. Okay, that's one of the trends I've seen. Another problem is that what it means to be educated has always shifted over time. Plato did not want people to write because it degraded human memory. I don't know if you remember reading it. It's in one of his dialogues. So, you know, there's always been some resistance to changes in handling information and the ability to adapt to the world. I have not had to go through as much of this as other people because from day one at the university, I required written, monitored blue book exams where I wrote the exam, I monitored the exam, and I graded the exam. And I got criticized for being for finding too many cheaters. Anyway.
How dare you?
There's at least one fellow professor of mine who had a teaching assistant write the exam, another teaching assistant grade the exam, a third teaching assistant worked the curve according to his high level specification, about 10% A's, 30% B's. His contribution, he signed it. Okay. That's an extreme. Okay, so what is happening? People find that there is going to be AI, that it has to be viewed critically. Things we thought important, like rote memorization, but being able to do some tasks the same against each other, sort of like sense of straight language. By viewing what other people were experienced on important. So there are people experimenting with new educational trends, like some of them are refusing to publish their lectures for each class, just so otherwise. Someone else is of course. So one way to support that is to do what the New York Times is trying to do retroactively, which is say you want data that talks about the real world. Well, don't turn to us. That costs money, costs time, costs judgment. When you buy the New York Times, you're buying a viewpoint. You're not buying data. It's not even information, let alone knowledge, certainly not wisdom. That's anyway. Nobody knows yet, but people are experimenting.
Well, Professor, I would say this. I agree with you that it's more on, unfortunately, it's gonna be more on the professor and how their approach is to circumvent you being able to use, AI to do certain things, right? But I have seen where my kids use it to study, they use it as, they'll upload their notes and use it as back and forth where AI is quizzing them off their own notes. So I've also seen it be helpful, but also, like you said, using the blue book or doing some other things, because we've had plagiarism forever. I mean, I've always could ask you to write my paper. You know, that's been around. I'm just asking a computer to do it now. It's
Yes.
just, you know, so that's been there. So I know we also have those different programs we can run things through and see if it looks AI generated or, so I know they do have some stuff.
Okay, but again, it's a social ag. I think we're suffering from a transition that we haven't quite caught up on. One of my first jobs as an assistant professor at Columbia was to come up with a enforceable cheating memo for the computer science department, and I did. I did by asking my friends at Carnegie Mellon, who were famous for having invented it. I said, how much of this can I copy with your permission? They fortunately said all of it, so I took that and then I added about 50% more that was unique to Columbia. So cheating regulation, legislation and regulation has been around. Some of the forms are again this cat and mouse game where, you know, I didn't really cheat. What I did was I found an essay about this question in Spanish and I used AI to translate it. Okay, so I didn't plagiarize really. You know, so, I mean, you know, there's a lot of holes that are appearing in our definition and enforcement of academic honesty because there's a new tool, right? You know, whoever came up with an automatic nail gun, for example, discovered, yeah, it's a good tool, but make sure nobody's on the other side of the wall.
Right.
It may go through it. So there are regulations about power and all that other stuff. I think it's a transition time. I think eventually we will figure it out, if only because everybody needs to believe that people who claim to have expertise, which is sometimes life and death critical, really do have it. Okay, so it may be that some schools already have this, that you have to pass a competency exam to get your diploma or degree. It's not sufficient to do what. But I think more and more what's happening is people are turning to education. Good education is people to people with structure devising situations which um here so, unfortunately that's going to be expensive. Almost no countries placement. It's not 30 years. Most schools are closed. But what's old is new. But for a long time, we have adapted to it. West Point at one time, what, 120 cadets out of the last, because somebody had passed around those. I mean, they take it seriously. The rest of us should too.
Do you see an uptick in oral examinations?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, or the equivalent in other apprenticeships. So for example, even welders have to show they know how to make a T-joint, for example, or something. And that's not quite an oral exam, but it's what is it called? There's a term in biology for practicums. There's a term for an exam in which you are given something and asked to identify it or make a change to it. So, yeah, I think we're getting back, right? Because we don't need the knowledge itself. What we need is the incorporation of the knowledge into our own experiences, so that you pass on what's good, even if the environment changes, because what's good should give you the ability to abstract principles to even new environments. Okay, and AI can't do that. All right.
Yeah, but As a social worker by profession, I've been following also the use of AI. And bots in substitute for a therapist.
Okay.
And some people are making very positive claims about their experience developing relationships with this technology. And a little bit to your earlier example of kind of feeding back to people what they give them. But,
Yes. Young kids.
so in the therapy world, are we going to be replaced by?
I honestly don't see how.
Yeah.
Okay,
I would.
some of the, some of the more, some of the examples of, for example, doctors not being as good as AI for certain diagnoses, but that already has the advantage that the tests and the image captures and all that are already formalized. It takes years to build a radiologist so that any doctor knows what is left, what is right, what does bright mean, what does dark mean, where is this? They have standardized. Hi. Okay. Hi, John. I don't see that. I honestly don't see that happening in therapy. Yeah, it's still the case that we had this discussion that a good therapist is trained in multiple views as to human needs, and that only by interacting with the patient can they detect what the best approach and treatment. The anecdote is that this woman asked a famous psychotherapist to look after her 5-year-old, but she wants to know what school thought he follows. And the answer was, I haven't met your son yet. How do I know? Okay. That sort of flexibility, I think, is extremely hard to generalize. Because you can't read that. You could read that somebody did that. You could generate an output. Like, I don't know how to treat, but.
Well, I sent you to the link about a technology has created a system where you can now, for $1.99 a minute, talk to Jesus. And some denominations are actually using that. And again, some people are finding that useful.
They make money down there.
And, well, yeah.
Yes, right.
Well, what's the difference between reading the gospel and that? What's different?
It's more personalized. They address you by your nickname.
Yeah.
All right, so money and society. Let's do that. We've covered some of this already. To the first approximation, I think we are in a cultural transition where the only real winners are the ones selling an AI product. But, okay, I'm gonna give you a quote. This Chinese researcher turned venture capitalist made the following prediction. 50% of all workers will be replaced in years. The question is, when did he make it?
Yeah, when did he make it?
I want you to think. You have someone. Ask here. Okay, he made this quote 2017. I know this guy because I taught him. He was at Columbia. They even saved his very expensive looking wedding invitation. He's written a number of books. I appear in 2 of them. I did not respond to his last email because I couldn't say anything nice. Sorry.
They couldn't what?
I couldn't say anything nice. I mean, his basic hypothesis in his second last book was that China
will win because they are the gladiators of the AI world. Which, as far as I could see, meant they had no respect for intellectual property. They would do anything. Okay. But he's a smart guy. And he was a good student, in fact. I hope it wasn't because of my course that he said something so stupid. We've already mentioned this phenomena called doom trolling, which one way to manipulate you is to encourage your most horrible thoughts about what happens under AI and how to protect yourself by buying today's product. Right? Don't fall for that. It's not even like they're saying someone else will do marginally better. It's like you will die. Okay. Right. And the reason, here's an example. CF. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this company, long-term capital management. This was an AI-based firm. It had, in fact, at least one, possibly two Nobel laureates behind it. They formed a company that used AI to predict market shifts based on what they sucked off the internet in terms of history. They went bankrupt and they had to be rescued by the US government for $4 billion because the government thought they would prove to be a form of contagion. What they didn't stuck up over the internet was the possibility that Russia defaulted on its bond obligations. And that happened, it's called a black swan. It's an unusual event. And that was the state of the art. And the money to the black swan was information that they didn't think was possible because it hadn't happened yet. Okay. But history tells you that be prepared to be surprised, right? And it certainly worked. They're out of business. It's basically says Russia default into bankruptcy. Don't put your money into AI yet. And when you do, think of it, when that settles down, think of it as investing in a public utility like gas, electricity, water. Okay, because that's what it really is. It's a tool for people to use. And in the future, maybe it will be taken for granted, just like nobody is in awe anymore of what your handheld calculator can do. Because you have it already on your cell phone and probably don't even know what it's capable of because you okay. I said dance while the music is playing, it gets to be the self-reinforcing cycles. The worst part is the social. It is built to encourage further interaction. It's a drug. So they scare you to use it, because otherwise you'll get eaten. And then once you're there, they say, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you click on this? And this is deadly when it comes to this, because the social effect is that both the content or in style of particularly youth interactions is dominated by people who don't have your best intentions. That is, people talk about AI stuff. They even use the form of language that they see that's generated. This is sort of
middle level blah type stuff. Yeah, really. Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, etc. Okay, so there's no critical thought because every time you think you're done, it says, oh, by the way, consider clicking on this. And it's just as scaring you as deliberate domain, encouraging you to interact was deliberate domain. Okay, so sometimes you see 13 plus only, but to the best of my knowledge, it's not rigorously enforced. There's been some, at least, breadcrumbs thrown in the direction of regulation. Anything that much. I think just as you have to have a license to drink on drive, there's 18, 21. It may be that you can only get a secure password or something once you have your 14th birthday or something. And then you will have to enter this and you won't be able to use the system until you're beyond the stage where your social interactions and expectations haven't solidified yet. Okay, let me see, anything else to say about this? So what is good? And in terms of what this will demand in terms of both money and society, some people are starting to make noises that what you really should be training is curious generalists. That is, the emphasis of education should be that people are both skeptical and detect interesting things by themselves by combining a lot of different experiences, not just, spelling and grammar, English and geography or whatever, but sports and social events after class and all that. And then discussing them or making decisions on something, Jesuits had a long time, cura personalis, the whole embodied experience. Okay. How do you set up a situation in which you intrigue people not just to stay online, but to examine something interesting and do that across many fields of activity because you can't predict where the world is going, but you know that it's going somewhere, and it'd be good to give kids what they would need for this unanticipatable future. Well, some people are working on that, and it means things more like lab-based rather than memorization stuff, or more hands-on feedback. I mean, we got a lot of this here. That was more personal. But that also means you're going to have to spend more money on teachers. So you're going to be spending more time, and you're going to need more of them. Right? And so we're also in a sort of social time lag there. We not only need legislation and regulation for the bad things, we need encouragement in the form of legislation and regulation for the good things. And the good things is to open up their worlds in a way that's appropriate to their age group, instead of having people get a job anywhere else so that they'll teach a course. I think that's a real possibility. In spades, this takes the form of the regeneration of trade school. Okay, because that's the physical world. Carpenters, plumbers, electricians, right? Robots aren't going to do that well. I mean, I would like to see movies of the first robot electrician. I'm sure what will look like. It's not going to be pleasant. I'm glad I won't be there to experience the smell. But what this means is back to people, back to the world. And I've talked to a number of educators who say that we are losing it in the United States because people literally don't want to get their hands dirty. Because they would want a desk job where all they do is do prompts. And get the feedback. Okay, so I think that's where it's going. Any questions on this? This is much longer. Okay, this is again apprentice-based of one form. And the social structures to support that are going to come along much after the rules and regulations about what's legal. Yes,
Well, just, the other day, I had to, meet with some, carpenters union organizers. Who were exactly saying, hey, the rest of the world might be in trouble, but we're kind of excited because it's that may have gone into, let's say, computer or some other field, or hey, carpenters, millwrights, we're here and we ain't gonna go away. So they're kind of gearing up, going after the schools for kids to come into.
that's good to hear. And Leo has something about unions.
That's what?
Has something about unions. And it's, he said they should be fostered. Again, because it's this embodiment idea that what makes us human is what we experience. And it's hard to do that in front of a train. All right. I could start this. I don't know how long.
I'll take just
Yeah.
on the curious generalist though. That's a tough one right now. Who wants to be a curious generalist? I mean,
What is it?
but let's say a priest or even a teacher would have to be a curious generalist. I mean, that is not what schools are training people to do right now. They're training them to.
I had to teach myself, and in fact, they asked me to teach, I had to teach. What I found is that nearly everything you experience can be used as some form of example, even in the most abstract course. Bring it down home. My wife will sometimes listen to me talk because she likes my analogies. Right? There are other times she said, somebody's boring me.
Somebody what?
Somebody is boring me. But yes, I think that, in the very biggest picture, having simulated experiences are not real.
Yeah.
And because of that, they're not incorporated. They saw this 30 years ago, where they tried to formalize what happens during a medical internship. I say, here's what this operation looks like. Here's what this particular set of patient data implies about a disease. And they found that even the people who tried to memorize that could not, because all they had to hook it to was words. And then you go into real life internship, and the teacher will say, yeah, this reminds me of this patient that I had. And we thought it was X, but it turned out we didn't see this until somebody poked him and he made a funny sound, and then we realized it was Y. Okay, all of that is experience rather than 98% X, 2% Y. Well, it was Y. And why was it Y? Because they found it through their senses. Go.
I know, it seems to me that a lot of this is coming to fruition in a bad way in entertainment. A lot of it's all fantasy.
Leo does not have entertainment. No, not his thing.
But I mean, I look what my grandkids
Yeah.
watch, and it's not real people. It's,
Yeah,
it isn't just cartoons, but it's made to look like real people, but
Yes.
it's not.
yes. The content form and the style is different. Yes, I think eventually people will realize this is as bad as, having people adulterate milk by putting chalk and water in it. That I think there will be regulations that, just as movies are graded in terms of PG and all that. I think what you will find is that will extend to things like cartoons, except it will push down, the the grades basically say you're enough for movies. Are you an adult or not? But I think there are finer distinctions. Developmental psychologists know how certain things happen at certain ages in children. It hasn't been made formal yet because there hasn't been any need. You get a generation of people who act as if they were homeschooled one day a week by an idiot. Okay, then what's going to happen is you're going to have legislation and regulation for the content as well as the qualifications of the instructor. I think that's coming. Okay, and that's one thing computers are actually good at. They can formalize and record and see for printout. What do I do when we get this certification? But they can't give it to you. They can't give you the experience. Okay, other questions? All right, now let me ask, where are we in terms of time? Because that's kind of part one. Part two is I have 6 pages of notes from the encyclopedia about Sullivan's saying that he certainly writes a lot.
How about
He does.
How about bathroom breaks?
All right. When-
Should we take a little break to get a snack or something,
Yeah.
stretch and then come back, talk a little more on the
Yeah.
part two?
Yes. All right.
Right now.
When-
When do we come back?
Whether after.
Oh, yeah.
9 minutes.
Yeah, 10-minute break.
But it includes families. Yeah. I'm not as confident in my opinions about this. It is mostly a theological statement, and I don't have enough background to compare it with other similar documents. So I basically captured in where I want to talk about those things that struck me as being particularly insightful or instructive. I may be missing the forest for the trees, but you guys, some of you I know are familiar at least with it. You did some disservice by making it so long, but I think there's a reason for that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to prejudice your minds by starting with my critique, short, right? And if you already have an opinion, that's different. You need to hear. Then I'm going to give you an outline of his 5+2 chapters. He has an introduction, chapters 1 to 5. Trying to summarize that down to what he says and why it may be important, with emphasis on chapter 3, which is the only one that has stars almost entirely on my outline of it. And then time permits, we'll go from the overview. Okay? So Steve, trying to wrap your mind from the very beginning. But here's my critique of Leo XIII, and he calls it Magnifica Humanitas. And you know, they spend some care as to what they titled their encyclical. I think he was being a little bit witty because he concludes by quoting the Magnificat. So he sort of brackets it. Yes.
Leo the 13th has been dead a long time.
14. He's the 14th?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, give or take.
What's the name? So I misspelled V. Okay.
Good recovery.
Okay, here's some top level critiques. It's certainly scholarly. It has as many citations to other documents as he has paragraphs, so that's 245. All right, it's also quite dense. He wasn't paid by the word, I don't think there was any thought he had that he did not write down. My own personal way of reading and reviewing documents like this is if I don't get into a particular subsection, I skip over it until it becomes apparent later, if it ever does, that it was important to understanding something that I really was interested in. So I skimmed the whole thing first and then I dug into it, and even then I skipped some stuff. And some of what I skipped never recurred and I didn't feel guilty. Bob's tried to dig into it. Anybody else have to read it? Yeah.
I tried to, but it was just totally intense. First,
You were reading Leo the 13th.
That was part.
Okay. All right, it turns out, and this may not be your concern, but technically, I was impressed at how thorough it was. He picked up not only many of the mainstream concerns, but some of the subsidiary ones. And I'm surprised he did such a good job. There are things he didn't cover at all, but it's long enough. It's clear to me that he was addressing a very wide constituency. I think that's the first 40%. So, almost 100 of the 245 paragraphs of basically doing what we would call in academia previous work overview. Right? And it touches not only the usual bases like the Gospels and Epistles, but also everybody between, the Swan himself, which is about hundreds of years. Okay. Because there's a wide constituency, he does 40% of the time front loading it, basically saying everything I'm doing is in a tradition that you probably have accepted already. So don't yell at me if you think I'm saying something new. I'm not. It's just a continuation under these circumstances of stuff that other people going back to St. Paul have said, and here's how I try to push it forward. I was most impressed by the personal tone. Now, I don't have enough background reading other encyclicals to know if this is unusual, but I did a real quick statistical analysis that in chapters 3, 4, and 5, which is the meat of it, because the front loading, which is chapters 1 and 2, is basically history. If you look at this and you look to see where he uses the word I instead of the Pope or my Supreme Majesty or whatever, as opposed to church, right? He uses I 170 times, but church only 40. He's still saying the same thing, but he's casting it as a one human being to another, which I was really quite impressed with. It. Even though it's long, it's friendly. He's saying, here's how I see it. And because it's not ex cathedra, you don't have to believe it, but it's like listening to somebody who knows what they're talking about. There is one or two complaints that people have had, and that he says should, and not something like sin. Right? So he points out recommendations, but he does not put the absolute moral authority, like, you must believe this, or this is so serious that it would be subject to confession or whatever.
well, just like, what I have heard some excitement about
Yes,
is that he is using the word doctrine. So Catholic social doctrine, not the previous, what's been used as Catholic social teaching, which you can dismiss if you want. But he is using Catholic social doctrine.
okay.
And so Vatican II type theologians, people into liberation theology, people that are into social change are very excited that he's using the word doctrine, as in, this is not up for discussion. This is the teaching of the church. It's not up for discussion. It's not just a teaching.
Okay, so this is what I said, I don't feel as comfortable on.
No,
So you're saying doctrine is more morally.
more substantial and more like for priests, you don't have a choice. This is doctrine as in the incarnation, as in the resurrection.
Okay, so that may have gone over the head of some of the other critics then too. You're saying that this is quite morally forceful.
Yeah, doctrine.
It's a question.
Not his, I'm not talking about Magnificat Humanitas. I'm talking about all the lead up, all
of this stuff, yeah, this is where he says church. All right, so you're saying, church is here,
Earlier chapters.
is here, but 3, 4, and 5, I gave me the impression you backed off of it. That's my impression.
In order to deal with this observation, my question is, what language was it written in, and are we looking at a translation?
What I got from www.vatican.va. Okay, in English, they have other versions and other languages. I assume that it is not AI. So I actually guarantee that the nuances are correct.
I mean, if we're gonna.
I think probably, right, I mean, it's Latin, right? It has to be, I think. I don't know if it's part of the church doctrine that secular is happening in Latin, but.
I'm only saying what a couple of people.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not that comfortable with my opinions about this because I don't have that much personal experience reading encyclicals, even if they're short. The only one I really got into was Humane Vitae and caused me intestinal discomfort more than once. Anyway. Okay, so this should not sin. You're saying this is doctrinal anyway, right?
Maybe.
Well, if you go against church doctrine, that's what, heresy, isn't it? Okay, what other things? My own view is chapter 1, chapter 2 are basically history of some various forms. Okay, chapter 3 is where the action is. This is where he talks about AI and makes a lot of good observation, surprisingly good, given my expectation. Chapter 4 has some recommendations about 3 things: truth, work, and freedom. And it's kind of interesting why he chose those, because he justifies them as being, I would guess, more important than other things he could have talked about. So this is not as strong as 3, but it's pretty good. Chapter 5, I think, is the weakest one. This is basically, he calls it power versus love, but it's really about war. And he makes the observation that war no longer is one large country against another large country. It's a bunch of small groups using things like AI to mess with other small groups, and their impact is not to win, but to keep things confused. Anyway, that's so I think that part of it is here, chapter 3. So let me now get into the outline, which is his outline, because that he puts it up front in the introduction. So we're not quite into details. That was my critique, that he has his outline. Like I said, this is Vatican.va. The subtitle is On the Safeguarding of the Human Person in the Time of AI. So it's almost in its subtitle, again, Cura Personalis. Right, so 5 chapters with an introduction and conclusion. The first one, he makes the point he is being faithful to the gospel, which is good. And he uses this term a lot: shared discernment. I always thought that was copyrighted by Ignatius. But he uses the word discernment a lot. Chapter 2 is on social principles. And these social principles, he says, starts with the idea that human in the image of God. Right? He always uses the term triune God, but he doesn't specify why that's different from God. I didn't get any information when I'm reading of this as to why triune is important to his argument. But maybe somebody who's more theologically sharp could pick it up. And he stresses two things. The first is the common good, and the second is social justice. And my view on this is that this appeals to the old school, that's 2,000 years old. This appeals to the new school because it talks about social justice. But that's just my view of what it looked like he was doing in order to address everybody. And say he's not just doing something crazy. 3, he says AI is principally a tool that should be used properly. But it misses what makes us potentially at least more than human. Tools should make us more human. So what does that mean? Among other things, more aware of other people. And he talks about more particularly, I think this is deliberate, Christian humanism, but he uses the word Christian and not Catholic. And that occurs often enough that I think he's appealing not only to old school Catholics, new school Catholics, but people close to Catholics call themselves Christian. So he's basically trying to establish his credentials and then distribute what he has to say among anybody who's interested in, as long as they are human. He doesn't specifically address any AI, but he does in several places of exercise. He specifically singles out AI researchers, AI developers, AI marketers. Okay, so he's aware that this thing has to be transmitted, and he notes the steps along the chain before it gets to an actual user. He spends a entire chapter on safeguarding humanity. And he breaks that down into 3 things. Again, truth, work, and freedom. And he says in his introduction, truth includes things like education and communication, which should be distributed top to bottom, bottom to top. That is, everybody should have a piece of the communication and the education pie. It should not be saved only for the elite. And in fact, it's part of the truth thing. He talks about how to make Catholic schools better. It's one of the few places he says Catholic. The work part we've talked about again is economy and social. And then freedom is contrasted with commercialism. And then his last thing is power versus love, which is really about war. I guess he couldn't say war. And he says the world is engaged in a battle between war and politics against justice and multilateralism. So everybody should have a piece of the pie. So that was his own summary. And we could get into now various parts in it. All right. In his intro, let me pick out the more important things. Some of his phrasing is elegant. He talks about the mysterious action of the Holy Spirit. It reminded me of whoever was the general after Dupe. Do you remember who was that?
Goldman.
Okay, he was asked, where is the Society of Jesus going? And his answer was, where the Spirit takes it, which is to say, I do not know. Okay, does that, in the intro, the common good and dignity are his two main themes. And he spends most of his time on what makes it common. Namely, more sharing, please. Let's not have tech bros carrying us and demanding our money. He starts with rerum marum, right, which is 1891, and that's kind of his touchstone. Very often he will compare what he's saying against that, because, you know, it's what, 130 some years later, things have changed. He's aware of that. He wants to catch up. And what he wants is, quote, in the introduction, adequate regulatory rules to ensure justice rather than power. And he has a couple of nasty things to say about tech bros. He doesn't call them tech bros. Right? Mentions his sermon again. And then he has a series of recurring images that I don't fully understand. Maybe you could help me. He contrasts the Tower of Babel, which is Old Testament, against the reconstruction of Jerusalem, which is also Old Testament. This is Nehemiah, one of the books. And the point he makes is that this was an attempt at homogenization, getting everybody under one ruler, speaking one language, etc. And the punchline is it was destroyed and people spoke different languages. So homogenization is a bad thing. And he sees AI as the present Tower of Babel before it collapsed. And then secondly, this Nehemiah, he likes because of how Nehemiah organized people according to their individual having read book. Like, wow, ways to do this. One is everybody has to use Windows Copilot or whatever, as opposed to your neighbor as if they are somebody different who you understand and allowed to continue to live their own way. I mean, that's kind of messed up paraphrase, but he, 3 or 4 times this comes up. And I thought it was peculiar that why would you use Old Testament? An awful lot of good stuff in the New Testament. What point was he trying to make? And I think he was kind of stretching it, looking for an example of how much similarity lack of thought that people wanted.
But I think, I mean, the Nehemiah thing for me, I mean, it's that he got 12 different groups
Yes,
to each take a section of the wall.
yes,
That it was, I mean, the effort to involve other people in the process.
Right.
Is perhaps the most important thing.
that's the
It's
point.
not just building the wall, it's getting everybody involved.
And that's the point he makes.
Yeah.
So you see it as more the social engineering.
Yeah.
Okay, so he likes that metaphor and he concludes with it too, is in his summary. Okay, so here's the part, and I gotta write it. We should not seek eliminating weakness, but harmonious growth instead. So he's after, you've heard about these little maximizers, guys who try to do everything to their body to make it more attractive according to some abstract idea of what looks really good. And he's saying that you don't approach life as a question of getting rid of your weaknesses. It's a question of instead growing things, not getting rid of things. Anyway, that's part of his intro. He says, give up hope and always having unlimited upgrades. He actually uses CS term. So life is not a question of unlimited upgrades. And then he uses a term that I'm not that familiar with, but that's my ignorance. He likes the term subsidiarity. Okay, is this part of the doctrine prior to it?
This is part of Catholic social.
Okay, tell me what it means. I mean, I have heard what it means from his examples, but I honestly haven't heard it.
If it can be done at a lower level, then it should be done at the lower level.
Yes, individuals are more important than authorities, is what he says. So that's old,
That's hello.
that it's, okay, my mistake. Remember, I said I'm not on top of this. Okay,
It's also like a way to say that, you know, me with my kids, I'll do it because I know how to do it right. Rather than letting the kids who they're supposed to be doing it, let them do it and they'll make mistakes. It's not a big deal. Getting them involved at their own level is more important than daddy doing it right. Or the priest or the bishop or the president of the United States.
or Elon Musk.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, this was new to me, but I knew that it could be simply because I was ignorant about it. All right, so that was the introduction. Now, chapter 1 and chapter 2 may be interesting to historians. There are a few things that were interesting to me. For example, he talks about Gaudium
And spend.
et spes, which is due to Francis, right?
No, Second Vatican Council.
That's, okay, this.
The church in the modern world was the text.
Okay, I can.
The joys and hopes of
Oh,
all.
you're right. That's what it says in my notes, so you're right. He mentions this 27 times in the document.
It's quite a document.
And he says that he summarizes it. This is my notes, but you probably can elaborate. The truth comes from listening to many voices. That summary. Wasn't this respect for other religions or something?
That was another document, but in the 20-some documents of Vatican.
Okay, all right. He points out that so this is number 1, that was based on the gospel. So he points out that John Paul II welcomed social science. Paul VI encouraged local interpretations, and then he gives a very long history of other documents. He mentions like the 12, right? 13. So I've been off by 1. That's a classic computer science error. Call the fence post error. They start counting at 0 or start counting at 1. This is serious. I mean, I've been doing computer science, right? or they still. I read a psychological study that it's those errors being off by one or saying less than or equal is due to about 50% of coding errors. So they don't feel particularly guilty. I'm just pretty much annoyed when it happens yet again. Anyway, Leo the whatever is mentioned. I will write what you said, Leo XXIII, says that labor is more important than profit. And he also says the gospel is only truly followed. He says this total of 16 times. These kind of are his, touchstones. And where am I going? Well, I'm going in the same direction that I'm trying to go further. Okay. That's basically it. Chapter 1, which is looking back on doctrine. Chapter 2, generalizing principles. This is where he again talks about universal human rights. Universal human rights. And he makes a special shout out to what particular subset humans. What would you guess? Or that's the easy one. No, it's not. It's a little surprised at you. Women? Yes. Women. He said has a couple of paragraphs on how things can be improved, even though paragraph 57.
Is that just what is the one and the two, are these in?
This is his chapter 1. This is his chapter
Got
2.
it, thank you.
I call this chapter 0 because I'm a computer scientist. But I will call his conclusion chapter N because that's traditional. Okay, universal destination of good. This is I don't know. Yeah, universal destination. That's the language he uses. Is this traditional? Is this
Yes.
borrowed? Who's it borrowed from?
It's not a Catholic social teaching.
Yeah, but does it? Can you pin it on somebody?
Oh.
I see. I don't have the historical background, so I don't know. Don't really if at all. Yeah, it's not him. Source. Right. Basically says the resources are for all, including intellectual property, which is a surprise. Intellectual property is for all right? But then he makes a big discussion against the idea of private property, which puts him in conflict with all of capitalism. And he resolves it by saying the principal purpose of making property private is to protect it so that other people participate. It's kind of weird when it comes to ideas. So if you want something to chew on, or I guess the other question was, I haven't heard of universal destination of goods before, but that comes up again several times. Right? We talked about subsidiarity, and the purpose of this is, to justify his credentials. Individual, family, and local concerns could be predominant over state or monopoly concerns. Right? I think that's not controversial. Once you figure out what it means. And he manages to mess me up by starting another long word with the same letter S, solidarity. He says this is a basic principle where it means no one alone. So he's just reporting what he thinks should be in your cultural background as a Catholic. And then social justice, which is sort of the engineering side of these philosophies. And this is one of the few times he quotes the New Testament. He talks about Luke and Matthew, with Luke saying, I bring good news to the poor. And he contrasts that with what is, okay, then this is Luke, Matthew, versus what is called in the trade, my trade, the digital divide. That one of the big problems he sees with AI is they push the rich. Which means that poor are because they have the computers and the network connections or the knowledge of how to do a prompt. They can do, important things. And then lastly, he stresses what he calls integral. I haven't heard this. Human development. Let me ask. Is this part of the canon, or is this his contribution? Because this reminded me a lot of Cora Personalis, that integral all aspects of human experience. Has anybody heard the overall human development before? So, where? Okay, all right. So this is old stuff. So one of the problems I had is that he doesn't completely separate what he's going to talk about. So it's like just fairly creeping what he collects as the stuff you should already know. But some of the other stuff. So, for example, he refers to the digital divide. That's not a principle. Right? That's an example and misuse of a principle, namely not for social justice. But not everybody has access to data. So, and then this should have been its own chapter. So I'm going to write 2.5. He spends interesting chapters on what he calls the examine. Liberal Jesuitary examine of the church itself, and it says that at the very least, what it's lacking most is this. Even within itself, that the church does not do social justice to other Catholics. It's right there. Like this is believe me because I'm quoting gospel, believe me because I'm quoting other popes. And we're messing up. And that leads to what I think the most really questions. Okay.
The government of the church, the government.
Yeah.
He knows he's done. What we gonna do?
Oh, okay.
That's why he's not trying, like a spring called church. And anybody.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Somewhere, I don't know where he contrasts enhanced humanity
Thanks.
versus the human with the divine within.
Yes. Yes, he does. That's, I think, in chapter 4.
Okay. So he's saying we're not trying to make better people, enhance humanity through AI.
The idea I get from him is that their AI is pushing in the wrong direction. Because if you only give people more by means of providing them with work and education, etc., then it will take it. So there's going to be a culprit. He never narrows down the culprit. It's human intellectual hubris and the need for becoming the next trillionaire. You know, but he does mention that. Okay, and that's his intro, and that's 40%. At this point, I'm guessing he thinks he's touched all the important bases um, for being believable to all the important constituencies. With some of the prizes like call out specifically when.
Well, yeah, but I also think I don't know what it is, but to me, it challenges what's been happening with the bishops here in this country. And he's challenging, among other things, he's challenging the US.
That's an implication. He doesn't make it precise. He does talk about China specifically. He doesn't talk about America specifically. He even talks about is the term the South something or another. Countries like Africa. I had to look it up. I know I forgot it. South.
Southern Hemisphere.
What?
The Southern Hemisphere.
No, it's not hemisphere. It's a term that.
Is it global south?
What?
Global south?
It may be global south. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't heard that.
That's one that was talked about a lot through the Jubilee movement.
Quite possibly. I remember being distracted about my mistake. Global south.
John, just one
Yeah.
very quick,
Sure.
quick examine of the church. Is that where he talks about racism? The church not getting on board?
He may, he did, it was single audience.
Okay,
He gave me the impression that he was unhappy that it's so top down. And he gave several examples. I don't recall that specifically. Okay, it's a long document, right? That's at the very end of chapter 2. Want to check that. Okay, chapter 3 talks about AI, and these are the ones where I feel more confident because it seems to me he hit the most important concerns that are even coming from within the field itself. His is placed in the context. He makes some bad words about what he calls the technocratic paradigm. Uses that a lot, which basically a concern with efficiency, control, and profit. Words, which means that he has to later in chapter 4 and 5 say, I'm not necessarily anti-capitalist. I don't want people being lazy, and anarchy is not better than. But he says what he sees now, at least at this stage of AI development, is too much concern about the wrong things. And you think about, for example, somebody arbitrarily, randomly, Elon Musk, right? That's Doge, right? This is his recent public offering, and it's a trillion and all that. No names are mentioned here. In fact, there were no crop. Okay, all right. Paragraph 97 is worth calling out because that's where he states what should be instead of theoretic paradigm. He says human intelligence, conscience, and freedom should guide innovation. Okay, and I worked with enough people. That innovation doesn't necessarily, but a fair amount human intelligence does happen. Freedom in the conscience part, something that I've never really seen in at least in science. People want I could two warning. Warning number one, he says, this is dead on, absolutely, and he got it down to 3 words. The problem with AI systems from their very beginning is that they've cultivated, not built. That is, if you learn something, it's on the basis of something that's fed to you, which you yourself, as the feeder, may not understand. I mean, how many people have read all of the New York Times? All of read it. So you pump this all into this huge engine and it comes up and embeddings, and it surprises you because there are things there you would have never imagined. Because among other things, they can't tell fact from fiction. If something's cultivated and not built, you get what grows. It turns out to be a terrible weed. It can also be wonderful, but it's not because you built it to be wonderful. So, the second warning, and the reason why that's a warning is because you don't know, you can't control it. You can't control it. You can't ensure that it's working. All right, warning number 2. And by that's again 2 words. That is, there's no direct experience of the real world, in particular the real world of other things. Okay? And that's right up front. This is where I think it's appropriate for me to read this scene. I will read it. I'm not Robin Williams, so I cannot read it for me, right? But okay. How many people have seen the movie? Remember the scene where
What movie?
good Will Hunting?
Only twice though.
100 years ago, I think.
Well, okay, you may recall this. They were sitting on a park bench at Boston Public Gardens, and Will, who's a genius, had just finished criticizing a painting that his psychiatrist did. And the psychiatrist responds, so if I ask you about art, you probably give me the skinny on every art book ever written. Michelangelo, you know a lot about him. It's like work, political aspirations, him and the Pope, sexual orientation, the whole works, right? I bet you can't tell me what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. You've never actually stood there and looked up at the beautiful ceiling, seen that. And if I asked you about women, you probably give me a syllabus about your personal favorites. You may have even been late a few times, but you can't tell me what it feels like to wake up next to a woman and feel truly happy. Of kid. I'd ask you about war. Probably throw Shakespeare at me. Once more into the breach, dear friends. But you've never been near one. You've never held your best friend's head in your lap, watching gasp his last breath, looking to you for help. I'm going to ask you about love, but you probably wrote me a sonnet. You've never looked at a woman and been totally vulnerable. Know someone who could level you with her eyes, feeling like God put an angel on there just for you. Who could rescue you, one who could rescue you from the depths of hell. And you wouldn't know what it's like to be her angel, to have that love for her, be there forever through anything, through cancer. You wouldn't know about sleeping, sitting up in the hospital room 2 months, holding your hand because the doctors could see in your eyes that the term visiting hours doesn't apply to you. You don't know about real loss. It only occurs when you love something more than you love yourself. And it goes on, but it's a very powerful scene. It's been recorded many, many times. I mean, it's one of the best things that those two young guys wrote, right? But the important thing here is experience trumps data all the time. And without experience, you literally don't know in a visceral sense what you're talking about. Okay, so AI is not embodied, and he points that out. He doesn't do the quote. That'd be interesting if he did, right?
Did he actually refer to that?
No,
No. I wish he had, but it's pretty clear that he gives other examples that distinguish experience from
Thank you.
records. But it's worth reading. And this whole chapter, if you're just going to read one chapter, okay, which would be about what? Um, he says he thinks AI is a valuable tool, but it is false to pretend it is morally neutral. Not morally. Let's stress certain things over others. Okay. And he details them. This is where he mentions alignment. Right? Yeah. Or mention this, right? Yeah. Alignment. And the problem here is he asks, aligned to which value? Not sufficient to say, we have tuned this. So it has some sense of morality. Yeah, but which morality? And then he makes some things that I thought were really surprising. He claims data is a common. My own comment here is, why is the New York Times still? Because they think the data is theirs. So I don't know if this is a goal or something he sees coming. He says that, like, the planet still has data. I don't quite make the connection in my own head, but it's there and reporting on it. He also says we should disarm use of words. Like the they exaggerate as AI does. Back off a little bit with each other and even with data. And he says, underline that, power does now right govern. That's got to refer to something kind of.
Would you just say that's not?
Power does not give anyone the right to govern. Just because you have power doesn't mean you can tell other people what. Okay, that it's a moral question, not a power question. Okay, then another paragraph that I think is worth calling out, paragraph. And this one struck me again because it sort of gets at this paragraph 111, not 3, but 111. That what is innovation? And this is really scriptural. Is the participation of divine creation, which is an interesting cut. I mean, I've worked with some really extreme individuals, but no one has ever said, I'm doing computer science research because I feel like God when I build something. But he says that why is it important? But just as all creation is a common good, innovation should be correct. penetration to capitalism. So that's what I thought that was a pretty strong statement. Um, he's basically saying the intellectual sphere should be shared. It shouldn't be capitalized. Shouldn't be monetized. Shouldn't be part of a subscription that you pay monthly. And I've, you know, I don't know if you can see it, but I have emphasis on this entire chapter. It's really not what I experienced as the computer science researcher. He quotes by name this one I looked it up. Sorry. He, one of the very few non-popes he quotes is a historical person who talked about compassion. And let me see if you could complete this. His first name is Victor. Okay. He wrote a book that's very, very Frankl. Yes. He calls him out by name. Now, I don't know if that's significant. It's generally called
And search for meaning.
And search for meaning.
Yeah, I got that part. But he could have put that in a footnote. In the text, calls out specific individual. I am not aware of who's doing that. Okay, so answers for me. He talks about Christian humanism, not Catholic humanism. Make that point of meaning. And that's basically it. But some of these things are really surprising. Human rights. There are some take-homes, even from a strict computer science research perspective. And they were surprising. I say I haven't heard them. That's worth reading. But after this, we get downhill. Any question? Or chapter 5? Yes. I'm struck by that. Historian said, data is not enough. That is not even information. It's step important. Information means it has a context. Right? Knowledge means it has been evaluated useful. And wisdom is it's useful. Morality. Morality. He has a valuable tool, morally neutral.
So I think of morally neutral being amoral.
So he's yeah. And he does like that was it's not equitable, etc. But he's addressing the idea that one of, at lunch, I think, was it Paul asked me, who are the big names in AI now? One of the guys is quoted as saying, when you find a technological invention, you can't help but follow it. That's not right. You have to decide whether to follow it.
Is the implication that it is potentially immoral?
I didn't get that as a subtext. I got more of a concern that it's being taken for granted as a good without examination. It wasn't like he was really against it. Some of that in 245 paragraphs is going to leak out if you believe that. I think he was struggling himself, and he said, here's one of the problems I have. I don't believe you when you say it's a neutral technology. It's not, because nearly any technology has an implicit use whose can be evaluated in terms of, at least in his terms, does it contribute to the common good?
And the final thing,
Yes.
I think it's fascinating. power doesn't give the right to govern.
That's what he says.
In other words, the medieval Arthurian notion that might makes right,
Yes.
and he's kind of taking some of the posture of the current administration. We do it because we can. And he's taking issue.
Yes. He's saying we are beyond that. We know more.
Yeah.
And we should pay attention to human effects rather than profit, power, or whatever. Yeah, like I said, if you're gonna read anything, read chapter 3. Okay,
Thanks.
all right, chapter 4 and 5 have some concrete ideas, but I don't think he pushes on them hard enough. That's my opinion, and it's shared by some other commentators. He talks about truth. Basically saying disinformation is bad, which is a moral judgment. Elaborate, doesn't say how it should be. And although he is in favor of something, he made this up. Apology of he sees and therefore it should be cultivated in all of its forms, top, middle, bottom. So he says education is never going to be equaled by any machine. Again, we've been over that. Yeah, let's talk more. Friendships. He specifically uses the word Catholic in one of the very few places here. Catholic schools. Says by name, everything else is Christian. Here it's Catholic. Or basically says there's not enough DEI. Counter examples, but I'm guessing he thinks that we have to pay to play. As rich people in the of Catholic education. And I think he wasn't paying attention to something like that. It's just race schools, right? Isn't that directly in contrast to what he's saying here? It would have been nice if he'd used that as an example. So, all right, he talked about work. He thinks that there should be a redistribution, not of wealth particularly, but of tools. So if you give everybody a fair shot at the toolbox, they're going to make some stuff that they make a good contribution and they're going to treat them better since they are able to contribute. And this is again sort of capitalism controls the means of production. Well, he says give the means of production up. Okay, one of them being communications. He specifically says the unions must respond to AI, right? Because some of the unions deal with information technology. Some of them are safe, like we're talking about plumbers and stuff. He specifically mentions unions in a way that suggests that they don't need any further help. I is challenging your idea of fraternity, etc. Okay, he wants measures, and this is kind of sophisticated, I thought. Measures of progress to be more than GDP. That is, it's not just economic growth. So, there is with happiness and such. But he specifically calls this out as a false god. That, you can't say AI is okay because look what it's done to the GDP. That's not enough. Right? And then he says crypto is bad. But he doesn't say very much about it beyond that. He doesn't like it. And what he says what's bad about it is that it becomes finance for its own sake. The only thing good about crypto is you can make money over it. Because it doesn't do anything, right? It's a false bank. What is its worth? Leave other people that it's worth. There's no there there. It's just make money. As long as everybody goes along for the ride, you might actually make some make money.
It isn't just make money, it's also burn lots of fossil fuel and help pollute the planet.
He doesn't talk about that as far as I can see, but I may have skipped it. All right, it's a lot of words. Yes, it's bad for the environment. So he sums this up, and this was a surprise to me, that work is important because a whole family. I don't know if this is sort of retro view of spring, whatever, caretaker. He claims that one of the reasons to be wary of AI affecting work is it's going to affect family life. Not because it keeps the kids locked in their bedroom reading stuff you don't know, right? But because if you have somebody who doesn't have a job, then you won't have a family. Okay, and that's either profound or trivial, I can't decide.
Maybe it's, yeah, going back to his last American experience, he saw the results.
Tell me, what did he say?
Well, I don't know, I'm just speculating that he did see the bad effects of not having work.
Unemployment.
You can see the parents, people are out of work and the family falls apart. I don't know.
Okay, all right. Okay. Anything else talks about freedom? Now notice all of these things he's been criticized for not being prescriptive enough. You know, he has the power. He could have yelled and screamed more if it made changes in the organization. This part of the church says the problem to ensure freedom, you can't have elite class first. And he says this is tending towards a new kind of slavery. People are trapped doing things that not give them dignity, even
He says that explicitly, flavor.
he uses the word slavery. And he comes back to it when he criticizes final. He points out China enslaves young people. You have railroads that are the basis, magnets that are necessary for things like that. Like the word slavery, you can easily just pull up the PDF and find slavery. They're used traveling. And together with this, he says, at least in my terminology, by the way, the church was wrong. And he apologized. I apologize. Church so long to condemn slavery because we freed our slaves and 20 years later for the Vatican to acknowledge it. I think I have the dates right. I think slavery was condemned around 1880. Our emancipation was 1860. Okay. He doesn't know what to do with St. Paul saying slaves obey your masters. But apparently that's controversial. Like I've read an interpretation that you should obey your masters because the end times are coming anyway, so don't make trouble. But that's one interpretation of it. But again, I'm not a exegete, so I don't know. Anybody have a comment? What did St. Paul mean by that? Does anybody know?
Can't we just take it as a wrong-headed nonsense?
Well, it could be. He wrote a lot too.
And I think I've heard, I'm trying to think, that there was an acknowledgement that the slave was actually a human being with Paul. If slave, okay, master slave, I mean, but at least, but maybe a positive look would be at least the slave exists as a human being. And he encouraged somebody who let his slave,
Onesimus.
yeah, let his slave go free.
Okay, all right.
So I'm with Mike.
Okay. This is roughly paragraph 196. You know, we'll dig into. This is a lot of large language models. But it's simple. I don't know why. Then he takes the crap. Then he apologizes for the truth. Sort of like there's another encyclical there that I have done. So, everybody knows. Just in a but anyway. Those who want to know more, that's okay, we're almost done. This chapter is about war. He called it power versus love. It is weaker than war, in my opinion. He says good things, but they don't seem to be new or powerful. Let me give you what I got out of it. Right? So I'm going to title it the way I think he wanted to, but wouldn't have gotten past the censors. Right? It's mostly about love, war. He brings back the Tower of Babel versus reconstructing the walls of Jerusalem again. This idea of top-down versus collaboration. He worries that people are suffering from a loss of history. He points out that it's been 80 years since we had a world war, and nobody hardly is alive anymore. So do we have to have another world war in order to remember how bad it is? He particularly says that small groups, we will call them terrorists, but he doesn't, are now how you do war. And you don't do war with terrorism to win, rather than to prolong a particular conflict to stay in control, at least of your small neighborhood. And the purpose of terrorism is not so much to overthrow the United States, but it's to remain the dominant political force of whatever country has formed the terrorism. Okay, and I'm not a political scientist, I'm not even a historian, so I don't know if this is trivial or profound, but it seemed a little bit out of place. We're miles away from AI here. Terrorists, as far as I know, don't use AI. Big countries do because they can afford it. They can target things remotely and all that, but terrorism.
Well, somebody was talking to me the other day about how the cartels are using AI in not only in their profit making, but in their, I don't know.
Okay, so you think there may be something there. If there is, it's out of place, just as I think slavery is out of place. Maybe he thought he had to touch these magic hot buttons to get more publicity. I don't know. I mean, he's doing partly a social engineering test. So, but he mentions this, that war is bad, but small groups aren't even warring. They're playing it fairly. He stresses this: if you're going to go to war, there has to be a change of responsibility. A change of responsibility as opposed to the AI did it.
But I'm just thinking of Hamas or
yes,
the small groups just prolonging the conflict.
Right.
Is actually, I mean, somebody you'd argue that's going on right now.
Yes, well, that's what he said. He doesn't mention names except for China. I don't know why. Yes. Okay, so like I said, it starts to lose content and structure near the end. He says, you cannot say the algorithm did it. There has to be a chain of responsibility that ends in a human can do something. And war should not be used as a distraction.
Silence being violent.
What?
No, that wags the dog.
What? He
Wags the
doesn't, he
dog.
doesn't say abstain. He doesn't say reflected cool. Okay. War as a distraction is bad. Okay, that's what he says. And then I think the second use of the word Catholic is this. Catholic author who says we can all do our part. This is an author of fantasies, but he quotes it anyway. Ends with a T.
Okay.
Yes. And I didn't know he was Catholic. Right?
Yes.
Says we all do our part. He's trying to say war is bad because there's no chain of responsibility. People use it as a distraction. They use it to prolong conflict. They don't remember what happened. And they say, what can I do about it? Just a single individual. Basically told concepts that we all have to do our part, and quotes 2 or 3 sentences from, I forget one of his books. But it was unusual that he called out the word Catholic and mentioned a human being. So if you're Frankel or if you're Tolkien, shout out. Surprise. And then he repeats some of the things like we should disarm our words, we should seek peace through justice, we should adopt the perspective of victims. But the only thing I think worth quoting here, because it moved me, the rest I thought was something you could see in many other places. Touch the wounded flesh. That war is not an distraction. You know, we're a body. You know, it's not going to do this, but you can, even as a single individual. Okay, and then he concludes chapter N. He talks here, Bob mentioned this, about transhumanism. That is, you know, the augmented human. Versus, answers your question, versus he compares that to the incarnation. Right? And which he says that this is the opposite because it's an incarnation into weakness. He was not incarnated as a king. He's, you know the story, even though the Gospels disagree on this. So he says transhumanism is the wrong way to make yourself better. Okay, so and then he makes this analogy I hadn't heard before. He says, what is the body of Christ? He says, this is a metaphor, body of Christ. This is a metaphor for human connections. It's not like we're all part of, it's not upward directed, it's laterally directed. That we are the body of Christ. Sort of almost like the Church of Christ without Christ, if you remember that from that was Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. Yeah. Some of us had it from Porter, okay? That the body of Christ is how we treat each other in the spirit of Christ. And then he says what he likes, and I don't like this. This looks like he was looking for a logo. He wants what he calls situated anthropomorphism. And at this point, I thought maybe he had been playing Scrabble and 50 points or something. But it's in there, all right? But he closes the big open parentheses that was started by saying This is in Latin, the
Magnetic.
Magnificat. Lost it out. There you go, Magnificat Vitalitatis. He ends it by quoting the Magnificat.
The Magnificat? He quotes the Magnificat?
Yes.
Okay.
Magnificat, but his encyclical is Magnificat Humanitatis, and paraphrases it, and this is a direct quote of his paraphrase. We need to look at the world from a lower position.
Ooh.
Right? Which, as far as I understand the history of the text of the Magnificat is pretty accurate. Right? Mary is saying that she's insignificant. Okay, but
Cast down the mighty from their thrones.
well, anyway, so this is how he concludes, and I thought that's kind of a nice flip of style. We say the magnificence of humanity, and you end with something that already talks about magnificence, but it's sort of paradoxical because you're magnificent if you could look up rather than look down. Sorry, I just. All right, I'm done. Any further questions? How are we doing on time?
I think we're done.
Sure.
Whose turn? Oh.
It's tough act to follow.
Well, just, I'd like to just a word, okay, just one
Yes.
second.
Please.
My life, including the time I was a Jesuit, I was more embarrassed about the church than not, to say the
Totally there.
least, sometimes to say the least.
Yeah.
Embarrassed is light,
It's being polite.
not particularly.
Yeah.
But lately, and with this, I'm saying, who else is gonna take on the shit that's happening? I mean, this, not who else, I don't wanna say that. I'm saying this is something worth rejoining. Now,
That's Spence, right?
the what?
That's Spence.
That's best, you know.
That's good.
And I'm saying rejoining at a local level, because I just, you know, there was the priest that was killed, Rutilio Grande in El Salvador, killed by the military, but working with the campesinos. I got a quote somewhere. It said, oppressed people have to be in small groups. They have to be part of some small groups to have any chance.
I was just gonna say, as long as you can get our asshole bishops to come along with it, wisdom.
Fuck it, do it, we'll do it. I mean, you gotta push back against them, yes.
We got a lot of asshole bishops.
We got a lot.
Textual analysis.
We got a good one though in Detroit, fine.
Yeah, we do.
Leo uses the word asshole exactly.
See?
It's all through there, you can try.
It's implicit.
Okay. Do you want to quote some of this? Did you want to quote?
No, I will, say that